I couldn't find Becca.
Hannah Knight National Issue Speech. Imagine this. You're walking up and down Main Street and it's about 7 o'clock at night. Now you're trying to pass the time until it's dark enough that you can head to the local park and look for a bench to sleep on. Now you've done this the past 2 nights and gotten lucky, but you hear that sometimes the park's full. All of a sudden, a nice car drives up with a clean-cut looking man that says he can give you a ride wherever you want, but if you'd like, you can come to his house, he has a place for you to sleep, and he'll give you a meal. Now, you've always been told not to talk to strangers, and obviously you're going to say no. Before you know it, you've jumped in the car and your stomach's made the decision. Now, you left home 2 nights ago, so you're kind of hungry at this point. Now, you get to his house and everything's fine. He didn't lie to you at all. He feeds you, he gives you a place to sleep, but you wake up in the morning and he says you owe him a debt. You stayed in his house and you ate his food and you need to pay him back for that. Well, you were kicked out of your home and obviously you don't have any money to pay him with, but he has an idea of what you can do to give back to him. And before you know it, you've been roped into the sex trafficking ring. So what is sex trafficking? Trafficking is modern-day slavery. According to Traffic 911, a nonprofit organization out of Dallas, Texas, that helps to educate people and helps victims, says that sex trafficking is the fastest growing crime in the world. While we spend a lot of time and money overseas helping these kinds of victims, we forget that this happens here in our own neighborhoods. If we want to change this problem, we need to know what it is, why it's such a large market, and what needs to change for this problem to be solved. So what is human trafficking? It's the exchange of any sex act for anything of value. Also, according to 911, we can look for certain signs to see who a victim is. It's important to know if we're going to advocate for these people. Things like scripted answers, inconsistent stories, tattoos that show possession or money, like money signs, barcodes, or property of. Things like bruises, burns. Sometimes they'll come onto many men at once, or they'll be very ashamed of themselves or shy. So pay attention to these kinds of people. In my scenario, the person had been on the street longer than 48 hours, but statistically, a minor will be picked up within the first 48 hours of being on the street. So why is this such a large market? Think from a marketing standpoint. There's a large surplus of supplies. They're seen as reusable and disposable. A trafficked victim has a shelf life of 7 years. Also, it's a high demand that's never going to end. People are always going to want to have sex, and that's not something that's going to change. It's also easy to find your victim. Hotspots are things like high schools, where a man can go into the school and see many kids at one time and look for the person who's sitting by themselves and just go for it. But hotspots go both ways. There's also places that's really popular for many victims to be used. According to the Protective Innocence Initiative, in the 2010 Super Bowl, there were 10,000 sex trafficked victims used. So what needs to change if we're going to fix this problem? We need to change our attitudes. We have to stop criminalizing these victims. Kimberly Catrola of the National Association of Social Workers said that most people in the sex trafficking or prostitution ring enter as minors. The average age is 12 or 13 years old. Now think if you see a prostitution on the street, what's the first thing that comes to your head? A lot of people think that that's dirty and it's wrong, but what you don't know is what's happening to her when you're not there. She probably started when she was 13 years old, and there's a man behind closed doors telling her that she has to do this or he's going to kill her or put her out on the street again, and she doesn't want that. Sarah Primrose, a writer for the University of Florida's Journal of Law and Public Policy, said that juveniles are historically seen as disgusting and show no compassion when these kinds of things happen. So we need to know the needs of these victims. Another thing that Traffic 911 tells us is about trauma bonds. Trauma bonds are when a victim is bonded to their perpetrator because they feel like they need them. There's a cycle. It starts with a honeymoon phase where everything's going great. That's when you come in and they give you a place to sleep and you get food to eat. But then tension builds, and that's the next step of the cycle. Finally, there's the big blow up where a victim decides that they're going to leave and get out of this. But somehow, the perpetrator can bring the victim back in and start the honeymoon phase all over again, and it's really hard for them to leave. So if we don't know the needs, we're not going to change this. The National Colloquium's final report of 2012 said that this is what a victim needs when they are brought out of their situation. They need the normal resources that any other person needs, but they also need therapy, a shelter, help finding a job, Sometimes they need protection. If they fear that the person that's been doing this to them for many years is going to come back and get them, they're just going to stay because they don't want to suffer the consequences later. And they need stability, or they're going to go back right where they came from. And it's not their fault, it's ours for not paying enough attention to them. So if we want to make a change of this vicious market, we need to educate people on the problem. They need to know what it is, why it's so large, what needs to change, and the needs of these victims. So be bold and tell people what's going on, instead of just looking the other way and turning the other cheek. Thank you.
And they're all still here.